Hello, my name is Pete Tseronis, and welcome to the Docks and Bridges Thought Leadership Consortium, where we are going to discuss myriad topics around our nation's critical infrastructure. I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Ed Rhyne, Senior Technical Advisor at the United States Department of Energy within the Cybersecurity, Energy Security, Emergency Response Organization. Welcome, Ed. We're also happy to have Aditya Sundararam, I hope I said that right, Vice President of Threat Labs at Securonics, as well as the CEO of Securonics, Mr. Sachin Nayyar. Aditya and Sachin, welcome.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for
Hi,
having me.
Pete.
Thank you. And again, folks, forgive me. Yes, we're all here virtual. We're all just having virtual coffee. Folks, I'm excited today. I'm the former Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Energy, which was an incredible opportunity for me to work inside the federal government, but also with the energy sector. And today, with these incredible thought leaders, change agents, visionaries, we're going to discuss relevant events that are happening in today's society, but really focused on where we're going and how do we continuously mitigate risk and create resilience to our nation's power grid, and how data will inform a lot of that risk mitigation. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with Ed. If you can give us a little more background about you, your role, and your passion for this space, and what it's like working at the United States Department of Energy.
Sure. Thanks, Pete. So I came to DOE from a rather non-straightforward way. So I've been at DOE for about a little over 2 years now. And before that, I was 14 years at DHS, S&T, and before that, I was in the private sector and some academic labs. Pretty much always doing technology development, mostly with control systems, either writing the code or developing the systems. Having a pretty deep understanding of the processes that were involved, and that's kind of carried through a lot of what I've been doing recently. Actually, everything. Not just recently, but throughout my career, having an understanding of the process to be controlled, and then writing the control systems, and then in the pursuit of security for that process.
Yeah, that's we'll get into a lot of that role, which is, folks, a lot more than Ed is giving himself credit for. CSER is an organization that's fairly young at the department, but serves a very critical bridge role with the sector, our utility sector, and others. So thank you, Ed, for that. Aditya, let's get to know a little bit more about you and this Threat Lab concept.
Certainly, Pete. I'm the VP for Securonics Threat Labs here. I'm fundamentally passionate about data and context-aware security, and I've been with Securonics for 8 years. Working with a lot of people who share the same passion in terms of collecting data from different systems, centralizing telemetry and applying analytics to solve cybersecurity. So as part of Threat Labs, we do threat research, data science, threat hunting, and it's the convergence of all of these three disciplines. How do we bring the best out of these three disciplines towards solving cybersecurity problems, and in that process also extend or expand the scope of security to include other areas like application monitoring, your OT IoT monitoring, fraud, so that you have because attacks recently have only talked about the convergence or the need for convergence of all of these analytics and centralization, and that's what we do at Securonics Threat Labs.
Yeah, no, thank you. And again, for our audience, this convergence concept, the 16 sectors that define our nation's most critical infrastructures, of which energy is one. Aditya, your point about converging and leveraging the power of data, ingesting data, but getting into how do we actually make sense of it? There is a science, and I really appreciate the DNA of Securonics and its academic background and ties to our nation's critical infrastructure and national laboratories and universities, because without academia, government, and industry working together, it's going to be tough to get to where we really have a resilient, stable power grid, and analytics will drive that. So thank you. Sachin, CEO of Securonics, talk to us a little bit from that visionary pulpit, why you started the company and what excites you about the future.
Yeah, thanks, Ed, and thanks, Pete, and great to meet you, Ed and Aditya. Again, so guys, just really excited. First and foremost, I'm excited. On a personal note, I feel COVID has immunized corporate America a little bit. We can see each other's backgrounds. I look forward to kids coming into the pictures. I look forward to dogs coming in. So there is a blog somewhere in there for me to write. But just for everybody, during this time, personally, I've been working on my spin move in basketball. So hopefully next time we get together, I'll be able to demonstrate that. On the work front, more importantly, from a passion perspective, we started Securonics about 11 years ago. So we've been heads down at work, and the goal was always to create an analytics capability. That's where we started, because the SIM solutions of that time were more focused on compliance. So we wanted to add the context, and why other solutions who tried to do analytics did not work, because they didn't have context. So we added the context. Then over a period of time, we started getting involved in a lot of insider threat scenarios, because that's where you needed the identity and the entity context. And then over a period of time, companies started asking us to do it at scale. So we moved our entire solution over to Hadoop components, so they could have infinite scalability. And then rewrote everything for cloud. So it became cloud native, because we really believe that using cloud now and the power of crowdsourcing and the power of many, we can really provide these kind of capabilities and threat models, etc. in real time. And we'll talk more about that. But just really passionate about the obviously from the convergence of IT, OT, IoT on the business use case, but in the back end, the convergence of cloud and big data, and having the ability to do this research and deploy these threat models at our customers in real time. So I think those two items together will help us kind of move this forward and move the needle in cybersecurity. So that's what my passion is. That's what I'm excited about.
Well, thank you for that. And again, the rule of thumb on the Dots and Bridges, whatever you call this webcast consortium, is you're allowed to interrupt and say, Pete, stop talking. I got a question for Ed. So it's as if we're all truly sitting in a room or shooting hoops or having dogs in the background. So Sachin, it's great to see you again. And again, for the audience, the beauty of this type of dialogue is to really showcase open government tenets, being collaborative, transparent, participatory across government and industry. There's no endorsements. This is about, as to steal Sachin's word, humanizing a company, humanizing the government, and understanding the role that both play in a sort of simpatico to transform, in this case, it could be the infrastructure, but also its impact on humanity. We've had recent events. I'm going to come to Ed here in a minute about whether it was in Texas or with the Colonial Pipeline, or you can go back to Katrina or PG&E. There are cyber and physical events that impact our lives. So you will learn a bit about that, and it will be obvious as our guests today speak to those points. But there is a technology component. There is never the tech is a problem discussion that will come up. And we hope to make this enlightening education and very informing. So, Ed, I'm going to kick it over. You've heard what our guests at Securonics do for a living, and this emphasis on analytics and data. I'm going to just read what came out in a recent executive order about this OT-IT convergence, and we'll get to those acronyms. But right at the beginning of this executive order that came out on cybersecurity, it says the scope and protection of security must include systems that process data, also known as information technology, and those that run the vital machinery that ensures our safety, operational technology. Can you just speak to the IT-OT convergence that Aditya brought up and why it's so relevant and important for us to understand?
Sure. So I'm sure you've heard about the digitization of control systems. So the electronic or the electricity subsector, pretty much every critical infrastructure is moving towards more digital control. And a lot of these systems can be accessed either remotely or through a network connection. And this is a lot of the IT-OT convergence. If you can get to a control element through the internet, there's IT systems that you're going through to actually get to that controller, which is doing the OT function, so the controlling of the process. Lots of data, will require a lot of data analytics. And, Sachin brought up, a lot of really good points as far as bringing context into the equation. And the need to not only have, let's say, the network and protocol analysis, but also the operational data to provide that context of what you're really trying to control and what constitutes anomalies. So if, you mentioned physical disruptions versus cyber, disruptions or caused disruptions. From a process point of view, they look pretty much the same. And you can make a cyber event look like a physical event by shutting down a system. Now, what's the cause of that? That's where the difficulty comes in. How do you kind of provide that evidence that what happened on that device was actually malicious? And, OT systems have, or OT environments have kind of an interesting relationship, reverse of what IT systems are. If you think of IT systems as being, your desktops and the things that people interface with all the time, there's infinite behaviors, because the person on the keyboard may not do things the same way that you do or I do or anybody else does, so there's infinite behaviors, but pretty much, limited protocols, because you're going to be doing mail, web, half a dozen or so other protocols that you use pretty much regularly. In OT systems, though, it's almost flipped over, because the OT systems, they have very finite behaviors. Relays are either on or off. Pumps can be, within a certain range, 0 to 100, or, within the process controls. But the protocols, there's almost infinite protocols, because every vendor is going to have their own implementation of a standard. And every asset owner is going to want to have their own implementation of that vendor's implementation of the standard. So as more and more things come online, you almost have infinite protocols. So it's instead of infinite behaviors and finite protocols in IT systems, in OT systems you have finite behaviors and infinite protocols. And that finite behaviors, though, is a benefit to the defenders, because it's predictable, it's stateful. You can return back to certain things. You know how the system's supposed to behave if you know the process. And this is where, I think having the network and protocol analysts know the operational context is important, and vice versa to some extent. So the operators, they can look at anomalies and say, that relay shouldn't be tripping. Let's go find out if there's actually a signal being drawn to it, from a control signal, or if there's actually load downstream that's changing. And that's where I think the context in OT environments is really, really important. And I could go on for hours, but I'll stop there.
Well, we may just keep recording and talking about things that we can build another program around. But yes, obviously that was a very succinct, but maybe for some, and we're going to move to Aditya here to build off of that. There's a comprehension that every individual who flips a switch on, goes in an autonomous vehicle, or drinks water that is being pumped from some system that is using analytics to keep corrosion out of it, you should really understand that a smart, resilient, sustainable architecture in this critical space is got folks like Ed and the team from Securonics and so many folks working on creating safe air to breathe and water to drink, etc. So Aditya, building off the context and convergence and frankly the protocol discussion, Securonics does a lot. For those geeks in the crowd, I'm going to read a few. The acronyms are SIM and SOAR and UEBA and NDR, but at the end of the day, user and entity behavior analytics, security orchestration, you've built a platform that is one that can plug and play and help organizations. Essentially, I feel, develop a risk profile for organizations to say, what can we take on and where are we needing help? Can you talk a little bit about the essence of Securonics and all these wonderful layers of security architecture?
Certainly, Pete. Yeah, to echo of what Ed mentioned here, I think the convergence or the totally contrasting behaviors that you would see with IT and OT, a lot of these can be solved by centralizing data into a platform, and that's been the theme of what we do at Securonics, right? Ed was spot on where this. Even if you take an organization which has hundreds of sites of OT and IoT, you are going to see varying levels of digitalization, the maturity of architecture. So it's not every every site will have the same set of modern advances in technology implemented over there. So it's very, very important to have as much contextual information that you can possibly bring in, and that's been our theme as well, right? Our recommendation to our customers to get as much telemetry data as possible into the platform, so that every action, though it may be explainable, you need to have the exact context to make it explainable in the first place, than making assumptions, because that's what attackers go after, right? This predictable behaviors that's typically seen with OT systems. How do you now key off of that, or how do you now change that to some of the unpredictable behaviors that you see in the IT world, link them all together? And that's where anomaly detection helps us pretty effectively, or context aware anomaly detection, right? Where we want to take even your simple things like vulnerability data, simple things like your change management logs. We want to piece all of that information together, so that what truly makes it explainable is having all of these data elements together in the same place, and then telling the analyst, or giving the analyst that visibility that, yep, though you may find this to be explainable, but here are other data elements which are contradicting to what you may think in the first place.
Yeah, I'm going to move to Sachin. I have a question about this commercial side of our world that obviously takes advantage of capability with Sacuronics. And to build off Aditya, your comment about data being collected or correlated and creating analytics, providing those insights for the human brain to make sense of. I mean, there is actionable intelligence, there's applied intelligence. At the end of the day, somebody's going to make a decision on what needs to be done. Sachin, in the commercial world, if you can speak to your entrepreneurial side, you started a company because you saw a need for at the time, if it was a security operations center, if it was how to manage it. But now we're in a world where cloud and big data and analytics and the veracity of data is everywhere. What are you gleaning from the commercial side that you feel can benefit the government sectors as well when it comes to protecting information?
Yeah, great question, Pete. So, all of us, like Ed said, digitization, right? All the, we see, you read everywhere, right? 10 years of movement happening within a year. So, obviously in the commercial sector, they have moved at a fast pace towards the cloud. But the good news is, so has the government, right? I think the government has, I spoke to one of the CIOs at the CIA a few years ago, and he said this has been one of the biggest movement from a government IT infrastructure perspective to the cloud. So, it is not to say move your OT systems to the cloud, but having the ability for us to be able to monitor the IT systems from the cloud and being able to manage those, so we don't get caught up in traditional change control testing. Traditionally we make a change. Even some of the companies are wanting to push threat models through a change control process. Think about that. The whole idea of a threat model or a TTP is that it should be real time, implemented in your environment when there is an issue. Companies want to run it through, some of the companies traditionally have been wanting to run it through a dev test cycle, which is 4 weeks long. You've already defeated the purpose. So the speed at which threat models need to hit your environment, when we find something in an environment, Sacuronics today is one of the largest cloud-based security analytics detection and response platforms. So, we have over 500 customers, with analytics and response that we run. So once you see an issue somewhere, and we are not looking at customer data, but we do see the telemetry that certain types of behaviors are spiking, or our customers are seeing issues. And sometimes a lot of our customers want to share that information. So first is having the ability to quickly update these TTPs and IOCs, behavior models. Second, the ability, and behind that is the ability for the industry to collaborate and our customers to collaborate, which customers are willing to do. And the government needs to do a little bit more of that, which I think under the new administration seems like we are moving towards that cycle, right? And then, ability to really, back to Ed and Aditya's point, OT is a poster child for behavior analytics. The behaviors are finite. But the question is not just analyzing behaviors. The question is analyzing context-enabled behaviors, like everybody said. The only word I would add is real time. The word real time is critical. because usually when we talk about analytics and behavior analytics, we start thinking in terms of batches, in terms of, multi-week, multi-month efforts. And let me analyze at the end of the day or end of the week. No, it has to be real time because like we saw in Colonial and others, the issues hit today and they hit within seconds or minutes, and you have to be real time in that analysis. So those are some of my thoughts. The government has already moved towards big data. So again, back to the combination of cloud, big data, being able to provide threat updates continuously and in real time, and being able to take action on them in real time is I think the name of the game here is the thought process.
No, well said. And I see Ed shaking his head ahead. I'm going to come back to you because I think about your portfolio, if you will, or it may have changed since we last chatted at CSER within the United States Department of Energy. You're a technology due diligence guy. You can look at tech and decipher its value. Part of that job, I think, would correlate to your relationships with the utility sector and just sort of bridging that partnership. Can you speak to, though, maybe some specific threat mitigation capabilities or programs within that portfolio? I know that consequence-driven, cyber-informed engineering, really cool acronyms you have, Citrix, CRISP. Can you kind of maybe brag a little bit about what the DOE is doing to help enhance the dialogue, which brings tech to a sector that is sometimes closed off?
Sure. So within CSER, there's a lot of different efforts that kind of span, I'll say, some continuum of, let's say, wholly government kind of analysis being pushed to industry, then, some collaborative, really, private-public partnership, and then, more heavily on the private side, to where the government just provides kind of insights, but really it's kind of driven by, the knowledge and the awareness of their own environment with the industry. And, so some of the data analytics programs, where you have kind of centralized analytics, where the government collects all this, receives all this information, and then does some analysis, maybe enhances it with some non-public information, and then pushes that back out to industry. That's one example. I think to get to more of a real time, you've got to have that more, public-private partnership to where, you're leveraging the knowledge of the industry, because every asset owner is going to have better knowledge of their systems than the government, ever will or ever should, actually. So to actually be able to recognize, the threat activities and then do the mitigation, in the near real time, it's going to have to be pushed out more towards the edges. You can't have, these, large tranches of data coming in and then doing some analysis and then pushing it out to everybody. So one of the programs that we're working on is looking at leveraging the knowledge within the asset owners' environments, sending some analysis products back, and doing some analysis on, occurrence of, specific UTPs, where in the environments, when, some metadata associated with it so that we can then start to see, are there trends across the sector, and then that you can push back to, everybody and say, and even if it's enhanced with other information, like if we know that there's certain groups going after specific vendors and, we can see some activity in somebody's environment, and yet other people have that same vendor, we can get ahead of the spread, perhaps, if we can alert that new asset owner that, hey, this equipment is potentially at risk.
Yes, so let me ask you a question there, Ed. Sorry, on that point, sorry to interject. So do you think in the future you'll be able to share that with the commercial world as well? Like you said, equipment is at risk, or a new TTP is built, or just threat intel of bad actors that you see. One of the things we have done is, what I have heard from government kind of leadership is saying, hey, sometimes we cannot disclose if it is a bad IP because it's under investigation, etc. So what we have done now is, if we get that information in the technology, in our tool set, we don't expose it to the end customers. They only see it if there is a violation in their environment. So that information stays kind of non-seen, but it kind of starts working. So we can all, again, shore up, everybody when if there is one source of information.
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. We'll be sharing as much data as we can. And so on the specific techniques, absolutely, we've got fact sheets per technique that we're getting ready to release, and those are kind of prioritized across some historical analysis of many of the ICS attacks, and we've seen that in the initial stages of the attack, the foothold, there's a lot of variability in what we've been calling the middleware of attack campaigns. The lateral movement within an environment, the harvesting of credentials. There's a lot of repetition in the techniques that are used. So we focused on those, and what we're doing is looking at how can we look at those, determine what the attributes or the observables. How can you increase your perception of those techniques? And it doesn't have to necessarily be in the network and protocol analysis. If we can get, let's say the linemen, the field operators to recognize, hey, if I see this, that can be associated or correlated to a specific technique. And if I see something else that can also be associated to that technique, then I can then go tell the incident responders that, here's an area that you need to focus on. The ultimate goal is to try and identify attack campaigns with, I've been calling it ever decreasing impacts. So
yeah,
an example I use.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more. Sorry. So you said you're creating some fact sheets. Is there also a real time or kind of a regular update aspect to this, so that folks like us can take it again, even if we want to keep some information private and share it with other governments around the world or commercial sector, if you guys are comfortable with that? So so we don't give the attackers any room to kind of operate and learn from somebody else and then, make an example, right? Because I think everybody has to be shored up at the same time.
Right. So the intent is to update these. The mechanism has not been decided upon, but there is obviously an element of, are we teaching our adversaries how to get around what we're looking for? And, obviously we need to avoid that. So, there's going to be access controls. There's going to be other things that, are going to be in place, so we know who's actually pulling these down.
Yeah. Ed, let me jump in for a second. Aditya, I see you're nodding and you're jumping at the chance, or do you want to jump in? And please continue this form of dialogue. I love it. Zero trust architecture, secure cloud services, driving analytics, all very central themes to, again, a referenceable May 12th executive order on cyber that came out that speaks to, I think, a lot of where the government and industry and this OTIT community needs to move towards, and that's partnership, trusted partnerships. But there are technical components. Aditya, can you speak to maybe the most elementary, how does a company get started understanding where they're at risk? Asset identification, compliance, and then how do you move the needle towards innovation?
Right. So, but before that, Pete, I think I'll certainly echo some of the points that were discussed. I think as we see in the wild today, there's a lot of attacker collaborations. Ransomwares are now offered as services, right? Just like any other cloud service today, right? So I think that continues to reinforce the partnership aspect that you talked about. How analytics teams, from organizations, from government, threat research, vendors like us, right, should collaborate in sharing these behaviors and making sure that we collectively lift our defenses, as opposed to playing this constant game of catch up, right? Holding information sensitive or proprietary till we see other organizations fall in the same place and whatnot, right? I think there is a definitely need to that, and I'm glad as part of the government orders there's more opportunities opening up on that front. And to your question in terms of where do organizations need to start, I think there's a lot of maturity assessments that we recommend today to understand first architecturally how their organization is set up. I think that's foundationally where we see some organizations induce gaps in telemetry or monitoring, because there's a lot of myths here in the OT world, thinking that I have my firewall, so or there's only going to be employees accessing these OT systems physically. So there's all of these myths that companies need to move away from and start focusing on facts, start collecting data, not just your logs that these systems generate, but like you pointed out, CMDBs, you're centralizing your asset inventory, centralizing your identity inventory, because we've also seen cases where accounts that were supposedly decommissioned or deactivated, we see them being active on the OT side, while IT have a good handle or grip on putting those blocks or putting controls against these deactivated systems or deactivated accounts and whatnot. So centralization definitely is the right place to start. There are a lot of compliance frameworks that gives organization that basic one-on-one controls or hygiene against, or defines what is acceptable policy use when it comes to using your OT systems, or how OT systems need to operate or IoT systems need to operate. So they can start from there, and then there's targeted use cases around monitoring admin privileges, modeled off of attack behaviors that we see with cases like Triton, cases like Honda, where there's always that single weak link in the system that attackers love to exploit, and then that causes a bigger damage down the road, right? So there is a maturity cycle associated with it. Starting with centralization, then your one-on-one controls, where a lot of frameworks today define what are best practices, and from there leveraging analytics to solve the OT and or the IT/OT problem.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to the partnership among government and industry today. We have a cybersecurity framework, version 1.1, I believe, which helps agencies and organizations establish risk profile. We have a risk reference taxonomy, risk management framework. We have more than enough resources. Check out NIST.gov or go to type in cybersecurity government, and folks, you will see that this is a constantly moving target, if you will, and unfortunately our infrastructure sectors are at risk. But I appreciate that, Aditya, because what I heard was that you got to start somewhere, know what you have before you know what you need to protect, and that includes obviously the user, the actual user of information, as well as it could be devices. They don't have to be human. So, hey, let's pivot, unless there's a comment there, because I have a question where I can tap into each of your visionary neurons. Did you have a question, Sachin, or a comment?
Yeah, I just want to go back to Ed. I think question for you is, I think you correctly said, the concern on the government side is, hey, can we share this information with others and not disclose our secret recipe or what we are monitoring, right? But isn't that the argument? And how do we get around it? Because isn't that what we need to do to truly create a trusted partnership between government and commercial that shares information in real time, not after months and years of triaging and approvals. So that, and this is an old question, right? That the commercial sector has a prayer in kind of protecting themselves with government's help, and vice versa. I actually think the government also needs help from the commercial sector to really understand the threats that they are seeing. So I'm just want to going back. I know this discussion has happened many times, but just before we close out, I wanted to just get your kind of opinion, Ed, and see, is there a path? Is there something that vendors like us can do? Create more safer exchange platforms or something along those lines, so we can really enable this bridge, create this bridge for both sides, so everybody can trust.
Right. So I think what I meant to say was that we want to share, but we also don't want to teach our adversaries what we're looking for, when we're looking for them in our networks. So I think the way we've kind of tackled it in one of my programs is to look at the anomalies, the behavioral, the operational anomalies that the asset owner knows, because, I might set a limit at, XYZ infrastructure, and, their neighbor, their peer says, that's not going to work for me because I would go through that threshold every other minute, so everybody has to set their own thresholds. So, leveraging their knowledge of their infrastructure and their environment and what normal is, to then say, okay, what are the anomalies? What are the things that cross that barrier? I don't need to know all of your data. I don't want to know all your data. I just want to know what are the things that don't look right to you. And then we can tie
the metadata, right?
Correct.
You don't need to know all the data. You just need to know the metadata. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so if they can code it or if they can, associate it or correlate it to a specific technique, that's great. And the more anomalies, operational anomalies that we see, the better off we are, because we'll be able to shut off things with less and less impacts. So, Aditya mentioned, the admin, escalation, privilege escalation. Absolutely. And if we can identify, the fact that an admin account was created, but yet no admins were hired, and then shut off that malware before it does anything, we win. So the impact is, well, we had an extra admin account for a day or 5 minutes. Okay, great. That's awesome. But they weren't able to do that follow-on activity of why they wanted that admin account. So, but yeah, sharing information, the way we've been looking at it, at least for one of the programs, is that, it's going to start with the asset owners. So they would then code it into specific, techniques if they can. Otherwise, they leave it in the operational world and they say, look, I've had to go reset this relay, 5 times in the past day, and I've never had to do it for the past month. That could be a problem. So even if they don't have an incident response capability in-house, they've now alerted whoever they come in for the incident response that, hey, this is a problem. Again, decreasing impacts.
So
it's
you're
not the
absolutely
government
right.
telling. It's not the government telling necessarily, hey, go look for this. It's more like the private sector saying, we see this. Does it mean anything? Let's have that discussion.
No, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. I think so. What we've done is, from our perspective, I completely agree that you cannot share the actual violation data, this proprietary IP addresses, all the other information. But the models around that are, like you said, hey, something anomalous has happened. Let's share that this type of a behavior has tripped and see if others are seeing it, etc. So to do that, we've created an exchange now where people can share the behavioral models only. You don't have to share, like I said, the actual violation. And then in there, what we are working towards is so people can share the anomalies to that behavior, that I'm seeing this behavior, I'm seeing 300% deviation from this. And yes, I've done the triaging from my side. So you don't have to share the details. You're just saying how much deviation you're seeing from that behavior in your environment. Is anybody else concerned about it? And then, bringing everybody together on a common, communication channel, a Slack or whatever, right? So people can quickly understand and see it in their environments. And our threat hunters, Aditya's team, is also looking at that, so we can then see, oh, if this is a real issue, let's put it across all of our customers, so that behavior model starts lighting up. So that is kind of our thought process as well, and looking forward to more collaboration there, because I think that's really where the needle will be moved, is when we start sharing these models, and then there is a real-time review of deviations or the metadata around it, and people kind of thinking about it across government and private.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
And not to forget, Sachin,
ahead,
the actions as well, right? What actions to take, because that's where we
That's
see varying levels of responses taken by different mature. I mean, organizations based on their maturity in this space, right? Because with cybersecurity, you have all these reporting mechanisms. If someone receives a mail what looks like a phishing email, they have channels to report that. There's action programs already.
I think Aditya got a little hung up there. And we'll there we go. Well, what I was going to do is, Sachin, number one, I appreciated you sharing that you feel like that's a differentiation. And I always like to ask my colleagues in industry that, the differentiator, what makes your company or platform special and unique. I appreciated you talking to that. I will say that if you read section 2, removing barriers to sharing threat information, glad to have you back, Aditya. Sachin, there's a lot of opportunity because the world's changing, and how we share information, how we can share information and the type of, there's a plethora that will resonate with you. And I think we just have to work together to make it so that it's not just sitting at a table, but it's agreeing on, why is this information important, and others need to know in a trusted environment, and hopefully do good things with it. So Aditya, do you want to, you froze up there for a quick second. Did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I apologize for my internet connection there.
It's all good.
Yeah. So I think the point that I was trying to lay out over here is that I think in addition to these detection models, it's actions that we need to share, and also what are all the other opportunities to enable folks who work in these OT and IoT networks, right? Because with cybersecurity, you have all of these training and enablement programs, and you take user actions. Where someone marks something as a suspicious looking email or a phishing like email, there's monitoring programs or actions in place to go back and understand the level of impact that email had. But to what Ed previously mentioned, how do we apply this principle to decrease impact in the OT world? If an operator notices something to be off, how do you take that operator's input towards your monitoring program? How do you leverage that, right? Because I think organizations, as they start thinking about this convergence, they need to start thinking about this single or shared accountability model, so that nothing is left to chance or nothing is left to assumptions. And how do we bring that all together, right here?
Well said. Well said. Here's what we're going to do. Ed, I'm going to come to you first, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to get this organic thought process of yours going, and then I'm going to kick it over to Sachin. It's the vision. This isn't our parting shot, but this is just what excites you about what you're working within, if you will, the environment and the opportunity, this art of the possible. Is there something that in, whether it's DOE or in CSER, your work with the national labs, your colleagues at DHS and places, we know that there's always going to be a need or a capability, but is there something on the horizon? Is it leveraging the cloud? Is it using AI that you feel good about getting to that resilience of our critical infrastructure here in the near term?
So, I think looking down the road, assuming that we, get to the point where we understand what it is that we're controlling, we have a handle on this holistic view of, pursuing security to where, the billing department and the InfoSec folks, as well as the operational security folks and the operations, are all working on from the same page, understanding the process and then applying, some concepts of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and having the systems dynamic enough to where if there is a malicious signal or even a, accidental signal that starts to throw the system into a state that wouldn't be beneficial, having the AI kind of be able to reverse that, put in the noise canceling signal, so to speak, to give you the ability to open that window so that you can then go take the corrective actions.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be quite exciting.
Yeah. I asked that just off the cuff in a way, because I think we could all agree there's always a cool term. If it's insights and actionable intelligence, or observability seems to be a hot one these days. I think it's all about just distilling down, but still being able to make sense of that. So, okay, in the spirit of leaving the audience with something that makes them wonder and say, I want to learn more about that, I'm going to start with Aditya, then I'm going to move over to Sachin, then I'm going to finish out here with Ed. Your parting shot. In a minute or less, what's something you gleaned from today, but you really want to leave with our audience about the future and the opportunity it presents, again, to bring a much safer life to humanity? Aditya.
Sure. So, I think as we leave here, a couple of things, to think about, one, a fully integrated IT OT environment. And, there's where, platforms like us can help centralize or consolidate all of this data, because when you're in the middle of an attack, the last thing that you want to think about is, hey, how do I go understand what happened in the last 10 days or last year, right? So that's where centralizing all of this data comes in. There's some great discussions that we had about not just intel sharing, but moving beyond, intel sharing. How do we, share techniques? How do we go after some of the non-conventional intel, like vulnerabilities, geopolitical factors? How do we know that, there are attackers targeting, region, legal and economical, factors also into this mix, so that you have all of that embedded into this context-aware, detection capabilities, right? I think those would be, some, points that I would have for the audience to start thinking about, because that, thought process of thinking that, hey, I have this future roadmap of centralizing IT, OT, IIoT together. I think that future is now, and that's what attacks are, teaching us every day of the minute. So I think we are here at that point where we need to seriously, start thinking about consolidating all of these into a single place. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sachin. You have the floor.
Yes, thanks. So I think to add on to what Aditya said, obviously, I think hopefully there is no debate about that IT and OT comes together. But for me, it's how do you take action today? So I have a couple of recommendations and ask, right? So as companies, government organizations, enterprises are thinking through this, you can have a very big program, fine, we can participate in that, but don't wait for that to happen. You'll be surprised that, bring in, even with a couple of data sources, what kind of analytics and insights organizations like us can provide. We've come a long way. We have, hundreds of people dedicated to only solving this problem day in and day out. I mean, my hair was all black when I started this company. So you know how much work we are putting in. So don't wait. And it's a chicken and egg situation. If you wait to consolidate all your data, then you wouldn't know till you start analyzing it. You don't know what data you need to consolidate, because you don't want to bring it together for the purposes of bringing it together. Tomorrow I might need it. What I've seen with companies is then all the right pieces are not there. It's not parsed correctly. It's not brought in correctly. So some of the data becomes useless in these large, big kind of, structures that you bring the data in. So as small as we want or as big as we want, we can make analytics that, and you'll be surprised, we can show results in days and weeks, not months and years. And so really encourage people to think about on those lines and have discussions. And then the other part for us is, we are truly looking to move the needle. That's why kind of I wake up every morning and put in the 20 hours a day. It is to see if, very few times in our lives we are at the crossroads where something that we've been working on for many years becomes a major priority for mankind, across the board. So that's kind of what keeps me going. And in that, I ask for your help, that if you see there are data sources, or there are vertical specific application data sources that you have no visibility, that you don't understand the rules, the asset owners do not have that level of information, let's reach out to us. We are happy to partner with you, and sometimes for no cost, to bring those data sources in and provide that capability and that visibility to the organization. I mean, if we can do anything on our side to move this needle, I'm happy to be part of that. That will make this all worthwhile for me and my team. So thank you very much, Pete, for giving me this platform.
Absolutely. It's all about the greater good, paying it forward. And for the record, gray hair, that's reflective of wisdom. At least that's what my dad used to say. And he had a great head of hair, and I miss him dearly. He's an amazing human being and man and father. Ed, close us out, brother.
So last parting shot, just flat out know your process. You have to know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So if you're in the business of, distributing energy or distributing electricity, know your energy flow, know your patterns of energy flow. If you see anomalies in that flow, look to see if there's, a cause that might be, cyber related, then you can jump into the network and protocol analysis. But, if your job is to move electricity, then what your model looks like. What the anomalies are. People have been looking at anomaly detection in electricity or, energy flow for decades, not tying it necessarily to, the cyber data, but, I think that's where we need to get to. But know your processes, know what you're trying to control, and then let the security folks do their job with that knowledge of the actual physical operations.
Succinct and sweet and coherent. I love it. I'm going to finish before I say thank you with, I learned a ton today. I have an appetite, a curiosity. I am feel well informed, and I want to thank each of you. We told stories today, your thought leadership, your vision. This wasn't about buying and selling, it's seeking and solving. And I think both sides here, and maybe me serving as a bridge, pun intended, dots and bridges. It's kind of funny, I rarely say that, but it seems to be the case. I appreciate each of your passion. I know you get up every day and eat, sleep, and drink this environment, but it is one that needs this type of thought leadership. So I want to thank you, Sachin, Aditya, and Ed. And until we meet again, and we will, I look forward to just hearing and watching what you do each and every day and twice on Sunday. Thank you very much for participating.
All right.
Thanks, Sachin, Aditya. Pete, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thanks for the time. Thank you, guys. Bye now.